Welcome to Pierce Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're on episode 121.
Which is super cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It's cool. And I'm excited about it for two reasons. Well, actually, I'm kind of sad. And I know, this has gone on a little bit
bittersweet.
Longer. Huh?
It's bittersweet.
It's bittersweet because I would say out of all the books, this book, Chris Voss has Never Split the Difference, has probably been one of the most practical ones, I would say. And not only most practical, but one that I probably will reread again.
Yeah, and if you're just tuning in and you're kind of figuring out what this episode is about, this is a level up review. So we review books once every couple weeks. So we've gone through this book for about 5 weeks or so, 5-6 weeks, something.
5 episodes.
Like yeah. So we are finishing up this book, which again, it went on a long time, but we pulled out so many things from it. Actually, Orlando and I were talking before we started recording, and we're both like, you know what, this is probably one we're going to just read again on our own, just because there's so many things to take out. We're only scratching the surface with what we're talking about on the show. And in reality, each one of these things is very difficult to implement, and it takes a lot of practice and time. And in my own life, I've realized if you just read through something one time, you take a couple of nuggets out of it, you're gonna benefit, you're gonna grow, you're gonna become a better person. But unless you're actively and intentionally trying to apply things consistently, you're only getting a very small percentage of the benefit that you could get. So we're both definitely going to read this again on our own. In fact, for this episode, I feel a little less prepared because I didn't read through the physical copy, which I normally do, and make highlights. I listened to it on audio because I had some errands last minute I had to run this weekend. So I listened to it audio, and man, now I'm glad I have this on Audible too, because I'm probably going to listen to it like 2 or 3 times over the next year or two, just on commutes, because there's so many great things to pull out of it here and there. And it kind of keeps you accountable. Am I actually applying the mirroring? Am I actually using these techniques and tools that I've learned?
So is it Chris Voss reading the book?
No, it's not Chris Voss. I don't think.
Man. Okay.
I prefer when it's not.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Usually with these self-help books, a lot of times they do. Sometimes it's good because they can bring certain energies. We talked about what's his name?
Gary Vee?
Yeah, maybe Gary Vee's one.
Well, because he brings insight. He reads the book and then he's kind of like, oh, well, this is what I read. This is what I wrote back then, but this is what I think now.
Which makes it very updated for another month or two, right?
Yeah, so
I
get that.
It's like a podcast, in that sense. But the reason why I prefer it being a professional narrator is because just because somebody's good at a specific thing and they're writing a book about it doesn't mean they're talented at narrating what it is they're talking about. So they might be a great author. Usually even authors aren't authoring the whole thing themselves. They have ghostwriters and people helping them in editing. So I usually prefer to have a professional narrator. And a lot of times it's because they're on a shoestring budget that they do their own narration, because it costs a lot of money to get a professional narrator.
Interesting. So I don't know. It's just kind of odd. You guys that watch us on YouTube, you've seen how, Never Split the Difference ads. Chris Voss's ads is on our YouTube. So obviously someone somewhere recognized, maybe the algorithm recognized the algorithm. Keywords. I want to feel special. Okay. I want to know that Chris Voss listened to our podcast.
Yeah. He listened and he's like, I want to purchase ad space on that YouTube channel.
But it's not bad. The masterclass, I might do it. In the sense that, and I don't know, there was a deal one time you pay $90 and you get access to all of them. And I don't know how good they are. I've read reviews. There's one like Timbaland making beats, and then there's Chris Voss on this, and there's one on art. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, Chris Voss, if you're listening, we're here if you need somebody to sponsor. We're here for you. Hey, real quick though, before we move on to this, we should announce our next book.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So our next book. So have you read this book at all?
I have not read the book in its entirety, but I have watched many, many videos and taken many interviews from this lady. So I kind of understand the concept, but I haven't actually read the book. So I'm excited.
Okay. Yeah. And me too. I've just watched people on Insta refer to it
so yeah, I haven't actually listened to interviews from her.
I have no idea.
Okay.
This is what I love. Sometimes I love this, but sometimes it can be bad. But I think on this one, it's going to be a good thing. So it is The 5-Second Rule: Transform Your Life, Work, and Confidence with Everyday Courage. And, that's going to be our next book. And the author is Mel Robbins.
Yeah. So it's going to be great. I've actually implemented some of her strategies just from listening to her on other people's YouTube channels and listening to interviews from her. And she's got a very simple, basic idea and concept that she puts forward. And, it's one of those things where I think this is going to be one of those books where it's not going to be groundbreaking new things, but like simple things. Like if you just
it will be groundbreaking. You should listen. That's how good it is.
No, what I mean is it's not going to be like an academic adventure into like intellectual pursuits where people are doing scientific studies and this is going to be like basic. Here's some strategies you can use. So I think it's going to be a quick, easy read that is going to be very impactful, I guess is the way
I agree. I mean, right away, if you just watch one clip on it, you'll understand a lot of the book. But what I like about this is we kind of need a book that it's probably going to only be 2 weeks we're going to spend on it, right? Yeah. And then we might have a heavy hitter after that. I don't know. We'll see. Mike and I haven't talked about that yet, but we'll see.
All right. So anyways, starting with our current book that we're reading right now, Never Split the Difference. We're finishing it up, last 2 chapters. And I'd have to say, at least chapter 9 for me is probably the most like practical for like garage sale, thrift store, estate sale negotiations. And then the last one, chapter 10 is actually a great concept in just overall negotiations. But I'd say like we've kind of saved the best for last, right?
I agree. And I think, obviously, you had talked about ghostwriters. Chris Voss with Tal Raz, I think that's how you say the other person that wrote the book with him, did a great job of, it's kind of like, you have a sandwich, right? And this one, it was good. I guess sometimes sandwiches, right? You're talking about some people like the bread, some people like the meat, some people like the different parts. All throughout the book, it's good, but there's such a good closer to this book. And in comparison to the other books, I felt that the other books, like you got the concept in one chapter and it kind of just went on and repeated itself. Now, some people have said that this kind of does the same. These chapters by themselves, I think, could be their own books.
Right.
That's how good they are. So I'm ready to delve into these.
Let's do it. So chapter 9 is Bargain Hard. I like that. And it actually starts out with a really, really cool story because it talked about him wanting to get a 4Runner, right? And I drive a 4Runner. And so it's one of those things like when we bought our 4Runner, I had no idea like how sought after this car. So I have an old 99 4Runner and it's one of those cars, like when we got it, we didn't realize there was like a cult following for it. And when we drive around, people all the time stop like, hey, do you love your 4Runner? How much did you get it for? Are you ever going to sell it? Like people love this car. So for him, he had this red 4Runner that was like his dream car that he wanted. And he found one at one lot and he goes to go purchase it. And he kind of explains how his back and forth went. And he had some power and leverage here because he had cash. He had a cash offer, but he knew that this was a sought after car. Lots of people were looking for this color, this model. And the sticker price was, what was it? $36,000.
$36K. Yep.
And he basically comes in and says, I'll give you $30,000 right now. And they come back. No, can't do that. And he uses all the tools he talked about kind of going into this, a little bit of silence, how do you expect me to do that? Right? I have $30,000 cash. And my favorite part of the whole thing is each time the dealer, I always wonder, like when they go back and talk to somebody and come back, I always just want to say like, bring that guy out here. Like every time you go back to talk to, just bring him.
It's like a boss back in the, I know.
Just bring that guy out. Yeah. We'll just figure it out really quick. But anyways, each time he comes back and the price is getting lower and lower. And every time he's holding firm at $30,000, he never budges from $30,000. And finally the guy comes back and he's like, all right, you win. Slides a piece of paper across the table that even said you win with smiley faces on it. Like, here you go, $32.50. And he's like, okay, thank you. What a great, generous offer. I'm so thankful. I know the car's worth more than that. I can't do it. $30,000. How do you expect me to do more? Right. And so he's like, well, you can finance. And he's stuck strong. And finally, here it is, $30,000. He walks out with that price. So, I mean, this is the type of negotiation that we can all relate to, right? As opposed to necessarily like a hostage situation, right?
Yeah. I was like, which one are you going to use? The hostage situation or the hostage situation? Yeah. So, but here's the thing. I read this and even in this story, it answered some of my questions because one of the questions I always had, and I've brought this up on the other episodes was, he always asks, you're supposed to ask, how am I supposed to do that? And I always felt that comes off kind of disrespectful or I just don't know how to say that in a tone that works. And he answered it for me in this one. So, the guy comes out and he says, the sticker price is $36,000 after all. And he answers, how am I supposed to do that? He says, I ask differentially. And if we ever get Chris Voss on the podcast, I want him to do this stuff on the podcast one day. But then I'm like, okay, I find that when I ask those kind of questions, I can't frame it in a way where it doesn't put off the other person. But then later on, he says, I'm just going to read it real quick. He says, the guy says, I'm sure he said, then pause if he wasn't sure what he meant to say. I'm sure we can figure something out with financing the $36,000. But then he follows up with this, which I thought was great. Chris Voss says, it's a beautiful truck, really amazing. I can't tell you how much I'd love to have it. It's worth more than I'm offering. I'm sorry. This is really embarrassing. That phrase right there. Yeah. This is really embarrassing. I just can't do that price. And I read that and I go, that is perfect. Because, right, you're not coming off like a jerk. You're coming off as somebody that wants to make it happen, that you really value what they have, but there's something that's holding you back and you want that person to help you. And I thought, that is so good. Right. And how many times, and I say this all the time, one of the worst negotiation I ever see at garage sales, or I've been in business meetings, is always the insulting the other person, what they have. This is garbage. This is why I'm offering you such a low price. Instead going, I really want this, but I'm sorry to tell you, it's really hard for me, but I need you to help me make this happen.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, that's good. And especially too with that idea of, you can do it in a way where you acknowledge that their price is fair. I've mentioned in a previous episode that I started doing Craigslist ad, and since the couple of weeks I've done that, I've had several sales off of that. Or I guess the purchases rather. So I've purchased many things off of this Craigslist ad that I've set up. And several times people will message me and they set a really good price. And I think like, man, if I was buying this for me, this is a killer deal, right? Like I almost want to set up some Craigslist ads for things that I want for myself, because you can get some really great deals, not necessarily like the deal you want for ROI, right? Like if I'm going to flip this, I've got to ship it. I've got to pay the fees. I've got to pay the taxes. I've got to let it sit in my inventory and the time it's going to take. When you're thinking all of those things, you have to get items for much, much cheaper than if you're just buying it for yourself, right? So there's a lot of times when I'm telling people like, hey, I totally understand why you're asking this much, because they don't always want to give me as much as, I want to get it for. They don't want to go that low. And I will use those types of phrases, almost like this is embarrassing, but rather, hey, what you're asking is definitely fair. I appreciate that value. I'm sure you can get it if you hold on. Unfortunately, I can't pay you that much. I'm really sorry. I wish I could, but with my costs, I just can't. But if you would like to get rid of it, just let me know. And by doing that, you're not insulting them. You're not saying like, how do you expect me to do that? Like, what do you think it's worth that much? But it's more of like, look, you're right. It is worth that much. But just for me, I can't do it at that price. How do you expect me to make a profit? And I'll use those things. I'll say after shipping and fees, and I'm going to resell this. And so once they see that you're not saying, hey, you're not insulting them, but you're saying, I need you, like you said, to help me make this happen. Otherwise, you're right. You could probably get that. And I hope you do.
So good. So good. So if anything, those 2 pages definitely will automatically help you bolster your negotiation techniques.
Yeah. And it's true too, when he talks about like going into, he's going to explain like 3 different types of people who bargain. But before he does that, he really explains how difficult bargaining can be. He says, here it is, the clash for cash, an uneasy dance of offers and counters that send most people into a cold sweat. No part of negotiation induces more anxiety and unfocused aggression than bargaining. And even when you have the best laid plans, a lot of us wimp out when we get to the moment of exchanging prices. And it's so true. I'm getting better at this, but even today I was at a swap meet and I was doing some bargaining with people, and you get to a point where sometimes it's almost easy over text messages, but when you're face to face with people, there's a tendency, especially with that risk aversion versus loss aversion, right? Like you don't want to lose. So I might not be getting the price I want, but I don't want to lose the profit that I do see here. And so I kind of wimp out, and it's like, okay, I'll give you this price. We'll kind of meet towards the middle rather than standing firm, because it does get uncomfortable at times, right? Like really pushing people lower and lower and lower and getting to that place. I'm getting better at it. And I realize the more I do that, but it's encouraging to know that this isn't something that, unless you're part of a very small few that like thrive off of it, most people, it's uncomfortable. It's uneasy, even for people who do it often, people at thrift stores, people at swap meets. And so you can use that actually to your advantage, that they're going to be a little uncomfortable too, pushing you. So if you can use the right tools and specifically recognize the 3 different types of bargainers that there are, it will definitely help.
All right. So I'm just going to throw this out there. We should have talked about this before we recorded the podcast. So there's 3, right? There's the analyst, there is the accommodator, and then there's the assertive.
Mm-hmm.
What type do you think? Well, I'm going to guess your type.
Okay. And
then you guess mine. And then maybe we'll flesh it out that way.
All right.
You okay with that?
Let's do that.
All right. who's gonna go first though?
Okay, well, should we give like a quick overview of what the three are? Like not like in depth, but that way we can kind of explain what.
Well, let's. Why don't we just guess, and then as we flesh it out, then we begin to validate it,
All right.
or say you're wrong.
Fair enough. I'm actually stuck. I know exactly what I am, what I think I am. I'm stuck between you. I think you're like in between two. I think you're in between accommodator and assertive, in like a good way. All right. I think you're accommodator in the sense that you're very personable. You like to talk. You like to keep things going. And then you're also the assertive in that like you're gonna make the deal and you're not gonna like be sidetracked. So like I feel like you bring a mix of those two. I'm not sure which camp you line into more, so I'm interested to hear what you think you are.
Oh, okay. Right now, okay, we'll analyze me. So I 100% do believe I'm an assertive person.
Assertive, all right.
And the reason, so so we'll just jump to assertive real quick. So some of the characteristics he talks about, for them, getting the solution perfect isn't as important as getting it done. Right. And you and I, this is one of our points of contention at times, even with the podcast or reselling, whatever it is, that I'm like, let's just get it done.
Yeah, we're negotiating a lot of times, even with the podcast. Like, what are we going to do? What kind of post are we going to do? I don't have time for this. And yeah, you're definitely the assertive in that sense, for sure.
And Mike likes things done really well. And that's why we have such an awesome podcast and awesome audio and awesome video and all that. It's because Mike. Because if it was for me, I don't know what we would have. But it's because I'm like, hey, let's get things done. Right. And to me, it's, hey, I'm going to walk away from negotiation and I'm going to win. I mean, that's the way I am. Now, the other parts he talks about is, he says, when you're dealing with assertive types, it's best to focus on what they have to say, because once they are convinced you understand them, then and only will they listen for your point of view. Right. And Mike knows this. Like when I'm done talking, it's because I have nothing left to say.
Yeah. Yep, that's true.
And so, when you're dealing with somebody that's assertive, that's one of the key things, because they will have, there's two, right? Analysis will stop talking because they're thinking, they're introverted, right? According to his discussion here. But an assertive person, right? They have nothing left to say. And you can tell that right away. Now, why accommodator?
Why did I think that maybe for you? I would say like I for sure thought you leaned more towards assertive. I was almost afraid to say that in case you were like, really, you think I'm like,
no, I'm not saying you're wrong.
No,
I'm just interested.
But the reason I kind of think accommodator a little bit is you're big on, like, one of the elements of an accommodator is wants to remain friends with their counterpart even if they can't reach an agreement. And there's a couple of other things too, like willing to talk, willing to take your time in negotiations in order to like build rapport. That's a big part. And you're really big on, hey, I want to build a connection. I'm willing to like maybe walk away and not get the best deal, or walk away and like, hey, like I paid up on this, but like long term, I don't want to ruin this friendship. And so the accommodator is a person who's willing to maybe not even come to a deal because they're more concerned about the social aspect of the arrangement than just the financial aspect. And so I don't think you're definitely not 100% accommodator. I definitely think you lean more towards assertive, but I think you have an element of accommodator in you, in that you're not just numbers. You're not like, hey, I'm meeting you. You're going to give me this deal and like, I'm going to get it no matter, even if it costs our friendship or whatever. You don't have that kind of cutthroat. I mean, you're definitely more cutthroat than I am, but I don't think you're that cutthroat, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I mean, it's funny. I laughed when I read this on page 195. He says, also be conscious of excess chit chat. The other two types have no use for it. And if you're sitting across the table from someone like yourself, you'll be prone to interactions where nothing gets done.
Yeah. Yeah. You put two accommodators together and they're just, nothing really necessarily gets done. And what I liked about these three, and we'll talk about analyst afterwards, but what do you think I am?
Analyst.
Yeah.
Through and through. That's why.
It's almost like rock, paper, scissors, though. Like they each have a strength that they can kind of work in a certain situation. But one thing I like about what Chris Voss says is you need to know these so you know how to interact with them. And then you have to realize that you're not just solidly one thing. You can pull strengths from other things. But one of the things that he said was most powerful is you've got to be you in a negotiation. If you are an assertive person, you can start to bring in some accommodation. You can bring in some analyst, but you can't like, I'm going to try and go into this negotiation as if I'm an analyst, because you're going to fail. It's going to fall apart because that's not who you are. It's better to strengthen your strengths, according to Chris Voss, than to try and be somebody that you're not.
Yeah, and you can read each of these right away. So, with Mike, whenever we have a conversation about stuff, most of the time, Mike will right away say, well, let's look at the analytics, right? Or let's look at sales, or let's look at the numbers, or how many people actually cared about this episode? Well, how many people listened and how many people watched it through on YouTube? So it's kind of interesting because I'm reading this and I'm thinking of every conversation Mike and I have had. And I've always been like, I got this feel from the community that this would be good. And you're like, well, look at the data. And so, but you got to understand that when you're negotiating with individuals that are an analyst, did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
Analysis or whatever.
An analyst
is that number one, the best way to win them over is with data. And I know that because when I was in education, there are some administrators I knew that were just about data, and it didn't matter what I said. If I just gave them 10 pages of data, I won.
Mm.
There were others that were assertive. They didn't care about the data. Right? They wanted to see the end result. They wanted to see how we were going to get from point A to point B. Right? And that was a very big deal. Right? Data aside, is how are we going to accomplish this, even if it's not perfect. Right? So when you're in negotiation, I would say most of the time I don't run into a lot of data people when I'm out, garage selling or at thrift stores. But I would say in the business world, when I'm, whether I'm trying to, and I haven't done this in a while, but when I'm trying to broker anything, whether I'm trying to buy a new car or I'm trying to rent something, and we'll talk about those things later, that's when the data matters.
Yeah. I mean, it does matter. You'd be surprised how many probably analysts you're meeting out and about. Because like one thing he said, for instance, is an analyst will spend a couple of weeks preparing for a meeting to have all of the information they can have so there's no surprises, to get the amount of information they can get in 5 to 10 minutes during a meeting, right? They want to go in prepared, having that information so there's no surprises. They don't want to be caught off guard. And they don't always make decisions immediately, right? It's like, so they'll be silent either because they're thinking, or it's like, okay, like even a yes or no or an open-ended question, it's like, all right, like next time we meet, let's go back over this, right? Like, because they want time to process, flush out all the details. And I'd be surprised, or you would be surprised, I think there's probably a lot of analysts that have already determined, and in a lot of ways, you're going to run your business like that. Like, these are the prices I'll pay for these items based off of these conditions. And if you don't have that data in front of you, you're going to negotiate differently, right? So like, if you're the one doing the purchasing, you're like, okay, like I'm not 100% sure if I can move on this. Whereas you might go a little bit more on feel, emotions, right? Like, I don't want to say emotions, but like, hey, like I think I could probably list this. There's not a lot of comps, but whereas an analyst, even if they're the seller of the item, has probably already done some, okay, these types of items sell for this much. I'm not going to accept anything less than this. And so they already have that number in their mind, even if they're negotiating well and fluctuating.
It's a great point. I mean, it makes me think about, I shut down with analysts. And it's funny because when Mike and I have conversations, sometimes when he shows me data, I'm like, all right. Right. And you see me do that. I don't say if that's right. I might say you're right, which anyways. But if you guys have read the previous chapters, you'll know what I'm aiming at with that. But it's true, because when I talk with people that are just about numbers, and this is one of my weaknesses. I'm not saying this is a strength in reselling. You need to be about numbers. And I share that and I say that, but I say that because as a weakness of mine, I know that's something I need to work into. Because I always know, and we'll talk about this on future episodes of when we focus more on reselling, that I know what I need to do well, right? I don't know all the details, but I know the overall number. And if I got my overall number good, I don't worry about the details, but I may be losing stuff within the details, right?
Right.
So how this relates to negotiation is, I think you need to push into understanding, this is again tactical empathy, understanding how the other individual is negotiating, right? Because right away, if I go to a garage sale or I go to some kind of negotiation, whether it's seller or whatever, and they start throwing numbers at me, I automatically just start shutting down instead of trying to listen and trying to hear the in-betweens. So I don't know. It was kind of it's a warning for me, because the way he broke this down, I think it's done really well.
Yeah. And I like to, and I didn't write down all the exact numbers, but he mentioned that a lot of times to be the most successful negotiators are more assertive. However, oftentimes the most assertive people have the most failures too. So like, it's not just like assertive is the best way. He kind of says like, it is good, but like in the most successful businesses, only like 12% of the people at the top are assertive, but of the top, they're all assertive, right? So like there's that weird dichotomy of like, what's the right way? And there's not really a right way. And he does argue that everybody needs to become more assertive in certain elements of negotiating, that it's important. But one of the things, like kind of going back with that rock, paper, scissors idea, like there's these 3 different concepts. And if you're an assertive person and you're talking to an analyst, when they get quiet, you want to fill the space with more talking. So then instead of them allowing them to process things, giving them silence, you now are giving them more frustration, more things to try and process. They're going to shut down. So if you realize you're dealing with an analyst, when there's silence, allow there to be some silence, right? Don't take it as I need to fill this space. Vice versa, if you're an analyst and somebody's being very assertive, don't necessarily think that like, hey, like they're trying to overpower me. It's just kind of their personality, and you got to kind of learn how to deal with that. Same thing if you're an accommodator, you got to cut the chit chat because the assertive people don't want to hear it and the analysts don't want to hear it. And so you need to know your strengths and weaknesses and play to those. And that's a big part of what he says. And he's got I think a website that he mentioned in here to go to kind of figure out which one you are, and then like kind of some specific things to do with those, like how you can kind of learn based off of which of the 3 you are. What are some tools and strategies that you can use? So good. So good. So now Mike and I will be better friends after reading this chapter. Yeah. All right. Hey, taking a punch. All right. The next section I thought was really good, because how many times have you had that standoff where you're negotiating and you just got punched in the mouth, and you either like, okay, I guess this isn't going to happen, and you move on to the next deal. Mm-hmm. But he's saying you move into it, and it gives, right, the idea of, number one, preparing, right? Because, and the other thing is, he goes back to the idea of letting the other person give the first price, no matter what the negotiation. But when he says taking that punch is, no matter how bad that first price is, you don't give up. Right. How many times can I tell you, somebody has thrown out a price and I'm like, I think we're too far apart. I don't think we can make this deal. And I walk away. Yep. I've done that many times. Yeah. Right. And after reading this, I'm like, I'm not doing that ever again. Yeah. And actually, I haven't done that the last 2 times, but that's because of reading this. Right. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah, I like the taking punch part. Specifically, that idea that it's not going to be personal. You're trying to get to the know. That's one thing that you got to realize too, is it's okay to get to the know because it gives you information, it gives you power. And then, he gives an example. Was this the one? Okay. Of this very specific number going back and forth, right? So there was a deal being made where somebody needed a certain amount to do a certain thing, and he was offered really low. He shot really high, and instead of doing this like in between, get to the middle thing, he was very consistent coming back, and he gave that very round number, right? He says, "What do you actually need to make this happen?" He says, "I need $737.50, right?" And so he was able to take the low offers and basically say like, "Hey, I appreciate that. I understand that you're under obligations." Because that's part of it too, is part of the taking a punch is there's usually something behind it. It's often not because it's like they don't like the way you look and they hate you and they want to like rip you off, right? It's usually because they're trying to feed their family, or they're under constraints, or their boss only gives them a certain amount of wiggle room. So you take that and you don't take it personally, and then you move and work within that, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the most practical takeaways, it reminded me of something I had done years ago, not having read his book. Again, I wish I read this book. Mm-hmm. I think I'd be in a far better place in life if I had read this book. I would say even just 2 years ago before I went full time. But at the bottom, page 199, he talks about, usually when the other person gives you a price, they give you an extreme anchor, right? And that extreme anchor is off-putting and you don't know how to react, but he gives 2 phrases, right? That gives an encouraging tone of voice. He says, let's put price off to the side for a moment and talk about what would make this a good deal. Or you could go more obliquely by asking, what else would you be able to offer to make a good price for me? And I remember when I had, changed positions back in the day when I was in education, and I had this number in my head. And when I came in, I didn't share the number, and they threw out some crazy number. And I remember one of the best questions, this was not intentional. It was just, I don't know. I just asked it. I asked, what can we do to make this a better offer? So it seems like you're at a certain number. What can we do? And I remember one of the deals I got out of it,
ended up giving me probably 15% more salary wise, but not in my salary. Right. So it's 15% less of what let's say I got a 15% raise. I ended up getting that money and it was directed towards something else. And man, I won. Right. In the end, and so they walked away thinking, hey, we priced them at this. I walked away going, yeah, you might have priced me at this, but ultimately my cost of living is a lot less because of these huge benefits that I end up gaining from this negotiation. So always think about that. I know we've talked about that before, but when you're talking about salary, I think that's key because sometimes we're thinking just of dollars and cents, but there's a lot of dollars and cents on the perks and the benefits that you may be missing out on by not asking that question.
Yeah, like a deferred income or whether it's 401k benefits or whether it's other benefits at work or healthcare. There's different things that people can throw in oftentimes that it costs them less. It's easier for them to maneuver around. And so thinking outside the box and even with the idea of giving a specific number instead of a round number, using that as a tool if you're working on like, hey, I can give you $37.26 for this thing. And, I got like an unopened pack of gum in my car, right? Like offering the extra thing in some ways too. And we talked about that on an earlier episode, but is that idea of, you're basically saying, this is what I can do. And it shows a certain amount of sincerity. Like, this is what I have. What can I throw in? And sometimes you can actually throw in something that's not going to cost you more that they would want. Maybe, can we make a trade? Is there something else we can do? But sometimes that thing isn't even necessary for like a good faith measure of, hey, this is where we're going to end up being.
So can I share one more thing before we move on?
Yeah.
I thought, okay, the story in there with Farouk about wanting money to be able to fund some kind of event. I think it was at Harvard. Such a great story. You should read that story if you haven't read that story, because I've seen it in action. And again, it's this idea of a range, right? We had talked about if you give a range, people usually will go to the bottom of the range, but this is different. This is where the anchor, right? Your anchor is some extreme anchor that you throw out there, right? So Farouk he needed $600. They told him no. They said only $500. And then he throws out an extreme anchor and he says, well, how about $1,000, right? Because that's really, if I want to make this happen, make this good for this alumni event, I need $1,000. And eventually he got them to agree to $737.50, right? He used like you just said that number. But here's the thing. I've seen this play out. I'll never forget. I was sitting with this director of development and we're in a room and I had suggested that we needed, I think we needed like $5,000 for a program or something. And, this guy, genius guy. He already had rapport. He already had technical empathy. He already had mirrored. He already did these things. He knew these people. He goes, Orlando, how much you need? And I'm like, well, I need the $5,000. He's like, we'll get that $5,000. I'm like, what? So I'm like, all right. Like, I'm just this teacher that's just sitting in a chair. Like, I don't know any of this stuff. I can teach you history all day, but negotiation, not my thing. So he's talking to this individual and the guy's like, well, how much do you need? And he goes, watch this. He goes, I need $15,000. $15,000 would make this really easy. Now, it would have made it really easy, but that was needed, right? That would have just made it the most outstanding program ever in the history of mankind. The guy's like, I don't know. So he threw out super extreme anchor, and the guy's like, I don't know. Well, he's like, well, maybe we could work and maybe we could bring in some other donors and we'll see. And the guy's like, the lowest I can do is $5,000. And he's like, but I'll write you some checks, about a month as business gets better. Boom. Just like that, extreme anchor went over the top. So I remember walking away from that going, this is crazy, because you think extreme anchor is so out of probability, but that's why it's called the anchor, right? Because it brings it down to a place where you can come to an agreement. And just like that, $5,000 funded for my program, and it was done. Yeah, and it kind of, or limits, I think would be another good, he calls it the anchor. I think it's almost like bookends, right? Like here's, especially when we talk about the range, even that is like important, is like highest, lowest, and it sets a point. And so if you are stuck giving, he even said, like, one good example he gave in this is if you're in a place where they are making you give a number,
and you have to give the anchor, give it as if it's from somebody else. Like, you're not saying I'll give you this much, right? But like the example was, well, if you were to go through a major corporation, they would charge you, $4,000 per person, right? So when you do that, you're not saying this is what I'm charging, but you're giving an extreme anchor of somebody else. Like, how much would you do for this? Well, if I was so-and-so, I'd only be able to pay this much. And so you're setting an anchor. You're not even saying it's yours. It's not your price. You're just saying like, I know people buy this for like $5 each.
But I think that's what happened in this. Right. So this was years ago, but now I'm remembering it was like, yeah, based on what other schools are doing, this is the range of what this costs at other schools. And so, yeah, it brought in that third. Wow. When was this book written? That's what I'm wondering. I wonder if this guy read this book or it's just he's a natural. I think he's just a natural. But anyways, all right.
It's good.
It's good stuff. All right. Ready to punch back?
Sure.
All right. So,
this is the part that I was like least impressed with. So this part was the using anger and why questions, and kind of the how to use emotions back almost like in the negative sense. Cause he even says these are short parts. He even says like, these are like last resorts, almost never used. Don't really recommend them very much, but emotions can be used. Like if somebody gives you an offer and you can kind of, if it's genuine anger you have, you can phrase it and use it in a way that puts them off guard and makes them make a decision quickly. If they could see you, they've made you very angry, but it also can create where you might get the price you're looking for, but it could end up leading to, they can't follow through because they made a promise out of almost like frustration. And he says you can never fake anger because that's going to come off even worse. So it's one of those things like, I don't really know how how angry I'm going to get in my typical negotiations with people.
I think he was talking about anger. I think also he's discussing the idea of whatever you need to do to rattle the situation, right? Because ultimately you're trying to catch that other person off guard, make them think about something they haven't thought about, so then you can continue on in negotiation. Now, there was a good reminder in here, though, when he talks about the no neediness, having the ready-to-walk mindset. Mm-hmm. And, he talks about, we've said previously that no deal is better than a bad deal. Oh, my. When I read that, there's so many circumstances. There's one circumstance I can think about right now that I won't share on the podcast because it's still costing me money to this day. But had I understood that, I would not have walked away with a bad deal, right? Because I want to reiterate this. Compromise to me is a bad word now.
Yeah,
it is. And maybe I'm wrong. But the sense I got from this is I'll never forget. And I'll share this one more time because this was a podcast ago. But when I was in this situation where somebody had told me, compromise, the way you'll know that things have worked out is if you don't feel good about the deal and the other person doesn't feel good about the deal. That's when you know things worked out. And I believed it. Hook, line, and sinker, I believed it. And now I go, no, that was so dead wrong. Because I look at the various angles in that negotiation at that time, and I could have taken this approach, the ready-to-walk mindset. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've bought in a car, and, if you know anything about car dealerships, like you leaving the dealership is never supposed to happen. Like that is never supposed to happen. And I can't tell you how many times I've just left the dealership. Like they're like yelling at me from the lot. And I'm going to my car like, hey, come on, you want to come back? Yeah. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to lunch.
Yeah.
And I'll go to lunch. And then within 5 minutes, they're calling me while I'm at lunch and going, hey, I talked to my boss. Maybe we could do this. I'm like, no, and then I take it to the next level. I'm like, actually, there's a couple dealerships around the corner. I want to see what they have. And then I'll come back. And then I end up, brokering the better deal.
Yeah. When I bought my Subaru, I'd say I messed up. I mean, it was the car we wanted and it was a good price and we were getting a good deal on it. And I'm really big. I mean, we've talked about like Dave Ramsey kind of approach to stuff. Like you can't just ask like, what's my monthly payment? You want to know what the total cost you're going to pay for an item is. Like, you're not just looking for like, can I afford this month to month? Because that might be the case, but over the long run, you're spending way more money to do that. So, I wanted to get the total price, not a monthly price to a certain point. And they don't like to deal in that deal, right? Because to them, they want the long term. They would rather you pay a little less per month and it be extended out over a longer period of time. And I couldn't get the price down to where I wanted it to, but it was a good monthly payment. It wasn't a bad price for the vehicle. And it was like the only one around that we saw like that. And we were to the point where we went through everything. We had our credit check. We had everything. Like we were ready to buy this and we were in the last steps of negotiation. We got them down a little bit and I wanted like another $2,000 off of it. And they didn't offer it right away. And I was about ready to leave. I was like, well, I mean, maybe we could just, leave. And they suckered me into staying. They suckered me into like, look, they showed me the papers. And that's a trick that a lot of car dealerships will do. They're circling numbers like, look, this is what we paid for it. This is like, we're only going to make $300 on the sale. Honestly, if we were to go any lower, we can't even do it. Right. And they convince you like, okay, this is as low as they can go. But I can almost guarantee if I just stood up and said, okay, thank you. If you can't go to this price here and like circle my number, then I'm out, and then start walking away, there's a good chance I could have got that number. Right. And worst case, if like I just start walking out and they don't, probably can come back the next day and get that number that they originally showed me if that really was their lowest. Right. So, and part of it goes back to that idea of it is, I mean, for some people who are more assertive, you can go for it, but that negotiation, that back and forth, they're doing that dealership. They're doing negotiations every single day. They're very, very comfortable with it. If you're not used to negotiating with people on that kind of level, I mean, I did this before I became a reseller. It's scary. It causes you like, you might be like, I will walk out, but then it's like, I've got a good deal here. Now you've got the loss aversion. Like, I don't want to lose this deal. I don't want to lose this car.
And they have the leverage.
They have the leverage, right? And so, yeah, there's definitely a certain place of being ready to walk away, not being needy. It gives you leverage, because one of the things he says in here that I thought was so powerful is, who has the leverage in a negotiation? Both parties. And I thought that was what was powerful, is if they're negotiating with you, even a hostage, right? If a hostage in a hostage negotiation situation, you think the terrorist has all the leverage, but the reality is they only have one buyer, right? You have leverage too. If you don't give them the money, they don't get what they want, right? So both people, if they're willing to talk to you, you have leverage. And so to recognize that and not to fork over your leverage to them is a crucial thing. And being willing to walk away from a bad deal is a skill that takes some, getting used to if you're not naturally inclined to being that kind of assertive person.
And the next chapter, when we delve into it, talks about that, because there's some good examples. And I have a really bad example from my personal life that I'm going to share, because I'm hoping to help others. So we'll wait till then. But this next part, the Ackerman,
was my favorite.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Because data.
Yeah.
But it's very good. Like, so there's two parts here. For a person like me that's an assertive negotiator, this is gonna be hard for me. The reason is I'm gonna have to sit down, write numbers down, right, and have those I would actually have to have notes on my phone when I'm negotiating. You know what I mean?
That's true. But I mean, I was even thinking this.
I'm not trying to say it's bad. No. I think it's excellent. It's just going to take a little more work.
Yeah. Well, even with that, I was thinking, so we'll explain what the Ackerman is. I think this is probably other than the range, I've used the range so many times in this, as far as like hard tools you can use, because there's a lot of soft tools like mirroring and the voice tone and things. But as far as hard tools go, I think this is probably the most powerful. And I think there's probably a way you can set up a program on your phone. I would assume like just a Google Sheet where you just put in a number on the top, like when you're doing your research, like if you're in a negotiation, and it'll instantly give you all the numbers you're looking for. Right. And I'll set that up and I'll send it over to you. And I'll show you how easy that would be. Put a link in our below. I don't know. I'll sell that. But anyways, here is the Ackerman strategy, and it's based off of a name of a guy who implemented it first. So it is set your target price. This is your goal. This is what you're willing to pay. Like, this is it. Like, this isn't like the max I'm willing to pay, but what's your goal? Okay. Then you set your first offer at 65% of your target price. 65% of your target price is your anchor, right? That might get them off their guard. Like, wait a minute, that's too low, but that's okay. You come in at 65%. Then you calculate 3 raises on decreasing increments. So it goes 85%, you go up to 85% of your goal, then to 95% of your goal, and finally 100% of your goal. It says use lots of empathy, different ways of saying no to get the other side to counter before you increase your offer. So you want to get them to say no in different ways. And then when calculating your final amount, use a precise non-round numbers, like the 37,893 rather than 38,000. It gives you credibility and weight. And then you can always, like he says, throw in like non-monetary items. So let's say your goal is $100. My goal is to get this for $100. Come in at 65, right? Just to make this round numbers and easy. So 65. All right. They're going to say, no way, that's way too low. All right. 85, right? You've come up quite a bit. And this totally breaks down the whole idea of meeting in the middle, right? So let's say they're like,
well, they have to give you an offer before you say the 85.
Well, yeah, you definitely want to get them to offer first, them to say no, to give you their offer. But like, let's say they're like $150, $200. There's no way I could do this for 65. And they say, okay, how about 140? And instead of the meeting in the middle, which is what a lot of people try and do, it's like, no, how about 85? Okay. So then you go up to your 85%. Then they say no. Then you go up to your 95, and then finally your $100. So you go up to your 100%. 99.32, right? That's how much I can give you. And you do this because if you notice, it decreases by 50% each time. So your offer, instead of like this meeting in the middle, like you're jumping up like equal amount each time, I'll give you $20 for it. Okay, how about 40? Okay, how about 80, right? Like you're instead of increasing in big amounts, your increase is getting smaller and smaller, which creates the illusion that like I have less and less wiggle room to actually work with. Okay, so it's really simple. I mean, it's 3 numbers you have to have. You got to have your 65%, your 85, your 95, and then your total number. And by doing that, moving in those increments, it shows like, I mean, when you make a 5% jump from $95 to $100, that's a big difference from $65 to $85, right? And so they're going to realize like, hey, he doesn't have a lot of wiggle room. If I'm still up at 140 and he's gone from 95 to 100, that's all there is, right? And so it creates this loss aversion. They're going to move on it. They know you don't have any more wiggle room.
And there's comfort in knowing that the number you're trying to reach is your number that you want.
Yeah.
Right. That was the biggest takeaway for me there. It was that what this does is it gives you guidance. It gives you structure. Right. And so even if you're an introverted person, even if you don't like conflict, this kind of gives you that structure. Usually structure helps you not have fear because you already know where you're going. And so you're not going, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to handle this. Hey, this Ackerman method is so good.
Yeah.
Can we make a time machine? Like, seriously, this is such good stuff. I'd have so much more money in my pocket right now.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I use something similar. I hadn't read this part yet when I did the negotiation that I did a couple of days ago over the phone, and it didn't end up working out. But I did notice that like moving up by smaller increments each time, it does create, I mean, a sense of urgency isn't the right word, but it does create like clarity. Like this is it. This is all I have to move on. Because yeah, in the beginning, if they throw out a wild number 200, you throw out a wild number 50, then what's the average, right? Like, okay, let's meet in the middle. But if you're like 50, all right, how about 70? All right, how about 80? All right, how about 85? Right? Like if you're slow, like they're realizing, okay, we are not going to be meeting, you know.
And you see these bad negotiations all the time on eBay when you get sent offers.
Yeah.
You get the people that'll send you, it's $100 item, they'll send you a $28 offer. Then you'll counter offer, like I'll counter offer maybe $5 off, and then you'll get 20 to 1. Like, you're not going to win. Like automatically I'm annoyed by you, and automatically I'm not going to, I'll still negotiate, but I'll just anchor it and I'll just say 85 is my lowest. I'll say it in a nice way. Appreciate the offer, smiley face emoji. You know, if this doesn't work, unfortunately we can't, you know, work on this or whatever, we can't meet. Sometimes I'll get them to come up like $20 like out of nowhere.
Right.
Other times they just go away. Yeah. But you know, we've experienced
no deal's better than a bad deal.
No, I agree. I think of some
items I have in this room that I bought because it was like I was in the process of negotiation. It was like, do I want to let this like this item, this is a cool item, and I wanted to buy it at $20, but they're only going to take 40, and I could sell it for like 55, but like it's a cool item, and I've already in my mind made that $55, and it's like, I should have walked away. Yeah, it was a cool item that I found, but if I can't get it at a good price, walk away.
Yep, so good. All right, any more from this chapter?
I don't think so.
All right, I got one more.
All right,
sorry. All right, so you had mentioned about this rent. Right, this individual who his rent was gonna go up, right, and it was gonna go from I think like $1,700 something to like 20. I forget what the number was, like 2,300. It was gonna be a lot, and eventually he got them to agree to. I think it was another crazy number. It was like 1,700 or something to that effect. But there's some good things out of this story, right? So one thing he says: don't let the rules ruin the flow. Right, so don't be so rigid in this negotiation that if they don't follow the rules exactly, that you're done, or it doesn't mean you can't adapt or be flexible. Now, not saying you give up, not saying that, you know, you make a bad deal, but always be understanding that, you know, it's not very rigid.
Well, and specifically, he was talking about the Ackerman method of they didn't come back with the counteroffer before he gave his next number.
Correct.
Right. And so even with the rules in this book, recognizing that like there's going to be times that you're going to have to say like, okay, like I did the silent thing and it's not working. Do I just stay silent until they say something? Okay, maybe I need to give the next number, right? Like there's going to be times when you have to break the rules. But I always even tell, like when I used to teach video to my students, or even English, right? Like teaching students how to write. They always want to know, like, can I do this thing? Can I do this thing? And they want to do like really creative things. And I always say, look, master the basics. Follow my template first. Once you have mastered the basics, then you can be free to break some rules, right? But don't break the rules to start with until you've learned the basics. So I think a good strategy would be to take some of the hard and soft tools that have been taught in this book, follow that like a template, and only break from those rules when you recognize like, hey, I understand that there needs to be some deviance here. I need to be able to move away from this. But don't just do it because you're like, hey, I'm going to, do whatever I want to do, because then you're not following the structure at all. So follow the structure whenever possible, and only if necessary, and you actually can understand the difference, break those rules. Agreed.
And the other part, and this was a good reminder to me, he knew he had the agent. So once you know that somebody's already working with you, like, don't stop there, right? Not until you get to your goal. And he says the agent just needed a little push. So he praised the agent and said no without saying no. And I go back to the other chapters because it's so good. Because how many times have I automatically said no? And then that just ends all conversation. I'll never forget a meeting with a parent where a parent approached me with some crazy thing he wanted me to follow through on. And I just said, nope. He's like, all right, I'm done, and walked out. And I lost.
Yeah.
I mean, I caught some heat for that one. And had I just said no and like, I'm not really sure, but maybe we can come up with something, like, would have been such a better reply, And so he says, and notice how he brilliantly mislabels in order to get the guy to open up. So again, these tactics are still being used, because later on he tells the guy that, that wants to raise the rent. He says, I'm a student. I don't know. It seems like you would rather run the risk of keeping the place unrented. Right. So loss aversion, the idea of he's labeling what this guy is thinking, and he's pretty spot on. And eventually this guy gets to the number that he wants. And the funny part, he says, then he started doing fake calculations to seem like he was really pushing himself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
and he gave that number, right? So like, that's not, I mean, with specific things, like when you're talking about like a $20 deal at a garage sale, that's probably not going to make a difference. But when you're talking about big purchases, right? Like even at a car dealership, if they give you a number and you're just like, can I do it? Yes, no. But instead, if you were to like, all right, hold on, you pull out your phone, you start writing some numbers down, you cross numbers off, and then you give like a very specific number, they're going to think like, okay, you ran all the numbers, like how much you make each month, and you write down like, so if you can say like, if by doing that, that might not even be a bad strategy. Maybe that works at garage sales or not, I don't know. But what I'm noticing is, kind of the more I'm doing this reselling thing, the more I'm starting to make better connections, like long-term, bigger connections. And that kind of stuff can kind of play a role. So if you're sitting with somebody and it's like, hey, I can maybe make this purchase every month, right? Which is very different from like a one-time purchase. Then you start running some numbers, and then you're like, okay, instead of $150 a month, and you do the numbers and you're like, I could do $136 a month, right? Like that all of a sudden says like, hey, I've actually thought about what I can do to make this work. Here's the real number. And I think it says something in the same way as the car dealer pulling some numbers, circling some numbers and showing me on a page. I don't know if all that stuff's made up, right? And it's like, this is what we paid for the item. This is our expected net profit. Here's the amount we had wiggle room. You're already not buying these extra add-ons. So our actual money that we make is going to be this. That doesn't even cover commission. Like, right. I'm buying into all that stuff. That could all just be made up,
No, I agree. It allows for time, right? For it to sink in and know. Now, before we move on, I just want to share one last thing for this chapter. He says, under the key lessons, when the pressure is on, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your highest level of preparation. And I think that's super important to understand, because how many times have you walked into something and you've had to walk away because you weren't ready and you thought you were going to, hey, I'm going to make this happen. I'm good no matter what. And then, no, you weren't. And then
that's where analysts win.
No, I know. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, but it's true. I myself, I'll freely admit it. Like, I am not the best. I mean, I prepare for things really well. I'm not giving myself enough credit, but there are those times that I just push through. And those are the times when I end up losing because I didn't prepare enough. So that's where we're at. All right. Before we move on to the next chapter, let's talk about social real quick. If you haven't been following us on social media, we are on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We are Pure Hustle Podcast. On Facebook, we are Pure Hustle Cast. Thank you guys for continuing to follow us on Facebook. Hey, I've been trying to be more active on Facebook with you guys. And we appreciate all of you. And also we're on Twitter, getting a lot of activity on Twitter. It's growing. So appreciate you guys on Twitter. If you want to see our lovely mugs, and maybe we'll role play some situations on YouTube one day.
And just to clarify, when he says mugs, he's talking about our faces.
Yeah, but
because we do have a mug.
People do like our mugs, and maybe one day we'll be able to find a.
And now when he's saying mugs, he's talking about actual porcelain mugs.
Yes, that's what we're talking about.
We've got to clarify, because when you say when people do like our mugs.
That's true. That's true. Now we do have shirts available. So we have restocked, and if you ever want to buy a shirt and just show us support, there is the link below. Really appreciate that. It took us a little bit, but we're back in stock.
Yeah, this is a limited quantity. Like, who knows whether this style is going to change, whether we're going to end up getting new designs. Like, so if you want the classic, super comfortable, most comfortable t-shirt I've ever worn, Pure Hustle Podcast, black and white shirt, you got to get it now, because, you know, time is ticking.
Okay.
Time is ticking.
Or if you just want to support us, go for it. And below, there's the link. There's a PayPal link to just say thank you in a monetary way. If in any way we've been able to help you out. And thank you all for the continuing donations. It's, you know, things like this are possible by listeners like you.
Yeah.
All right. And hey, reviews. We've been getting some awesome reviews. And about the book study, the book review, awesome reviews too. Appreciate those. If you ever want to write those up, we really appreciate those, because I got to tell you, of all the podcasts that we've done recently in the level of reviews, this one, I think, is one of the better ones.
Yeah. I
almost want to say the best one, but I think it's one of the better ones.
Yeah. I think overall, just the impact it can make in your day-to-day life. I mean, every single book is going to have a different impact. Like,
agreed.
if you need financial, like, Richest Man, every single book.
If you need to make your bed.
Yeah. Like, just like taking personal responsibility, right? Like, make your bed is going to be huge. All of these are going to have a huge impact. I think though, like with just like the negotiation aspect, obviously this is a negotiation book. It's really good. And if you haven't picked it up yet, I highly suggest picking it up. It's worth the read. Orlando and I are going to reread it. I don't typically reread books. There's only been a handful that I do. But I'm going to reread this because I definitely think I've probably implemented like 5% of the stuff in here, and I've seen huge improvement in my net gain, right? So I want to implement more of it and see at what point is it like, all right, this is as much as I'm going to be able to get out of this book.
Agreed. So thank you for all the iTunes reviews. Yeah. All right, chapter 10, Find the Black Swan.
Yeah, Black Swan.
So I was wondering where we were going with this, because his company's called the Black Swan Group.
Yep. And so it's kind of got a cool story. I mean, you're more of a history guy than me, but I'm like a weird factoid guy. Like, I usually know like the origins of words and phrases and things like that. I didn't know the origin of the Black Swan metaphor there, but it was kind of a cool story.
Yeah. And the story is basically that historically, right, no one believed there was ever a black swan until an explorer found one, I think, off the coast of Australia.
Yeah. So it was like, the idea was, people would say like, something that was impossible was referred to as the black swan, right? Like, well, that's a black swan, or, that would be a black swan. But the idea behind the black swan, once they discovered it, now the phrase has kind of changed, at least in the way he utilizes it, as the unexpected, right? It's the thing that like, maybe all of the signs are there. It's a key piece of information that people should know and can know, and makes all the difference in the world. And he gives some examples, right? Like Pearl Harbor, 9/11, other big events that have happened in life. And it's like, in the time, it was so unexpected. Nobody could have imagined. But then when you look back, it's like, oh, actually there were some signs, right? Like, there's things that kind of point to these things. And so the black swan is this thing that's unexpected, but not actually impossible. And you've got to find those things, because he makes this claim that every person in a negotiation brings 3 black swans with them, 3 pieces of information that are crucial to the negotiation, that if you can learn from the other side, you can leverage to your advantage.
Yeah. And, the example he gives is this terrible standoff that happened where it was a bank robber, but he was ready to die and he wanted to commit suicide by cops. So meaning that he wanted, ultimately his goal was for the police officers to shoot him dead. And they had missed that crucial piece. Yeah.
And it was actually like one of the first instances of this, and specifically of like somebody taking people hostage in a bank, and that they weren't actually wanting money. Like, he wasn't demanding money. He wasn't asking for anything. He was breaking all the rules, but they didn't see for what was really happening. They were under the impression this is a bank robbery. There's demands. This is a regular hostage situation, but it was something very different. And the black swan was, this guy was looking to kill himself.
Yeah, he's ready to die. I mean, that's all he cared about.
Yeah. And so all of the key signs that they later were able to kind of put together and say like, hey, all of these things now kind of made sense, like that we see. But in the midst of it, they didn't have that. And so the takeaway from that is, in a negotiation with somebody, you got to find those black swans. What are the things that are really motivating them? What are the things that make a huge difference? And towards the end of this chapter, he gives an example of a person or buying a huge building, and we're talking multi-millions of dollars here. And over time in the discussions with the realtor, he was able to, by using open-ended question, by using labeling, he mislabeled something intentionally, or maybe not intentionally, but he ended up mislabeling something. And the guy corrected him and said, well, like my client is, got some other businesses that aren't doing so well, and so he needs the money. Boom. As soon as they realize, hey, this person is in a bind, they need money, you've got that black swan. So before, in the negotiation, they believed, hey, this is a regular negotiation. They want the most they can get for it. We want the least we can get for it. But in reality, the person, they needed money quickly. They were in a bind. They had to move on this property. And so knowing that now changes the dynamics of the negotiation. So what are those black swans? What are some of the things in a negotiation with somebody that you might need to know that could totally change the dynamics?
Yeah, and there's so many instances. I can think of a friend who, somebody found his black swan, and he went to a car dealership and he was buying a car for the family, but the black swan was that it was a car for his wife that his wife wanted, and it was a different, it wasn't a family car. And the moment that the dealership, the car dealer knew that that's what it was, he instantly changed his negotiation from dealing with the husband to dealing with the wife. And once that happened, it ended everything, because happy wife makes happy life, right?
So you're saying that the car dealer was the one that recognized the black swan. And
oh yeah, because what happened is, so my buddy shows up on his own to the dealership. Doesn't, he knows, you ever see this at a dealership? Don't ever, this is my rule of thumb, don't ever show favor towards a certain vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. Well, his wife shows up later on the scene, and this is looking at this car. And my buddy goes, and when she turned and looked at him, he goes, I knew I was done. Because she smiled and looked at the car, and the dealer knew it's over. The guy lost. He ended up paying, I think, probably $5,000 more than he should have for the car. Right? But that was the black swan. So the dealer knew. So that's what I mean by black swan. No one saw that coming, right? You just had a regular guy coming in. Hey, I got to buy a car for my family, blah, blah. You're thinking minivan, you're thinking station wagon, whatever you're thinking. But no, it was supposed to be some souped up import car, you know? So anyway, so what I mean by that is always be able to find those black swans, because there has been moments where he talks about getting intel from other people, right? When you're dealing with people. And there have been moments where I remember one time trying to acquire a property and not knowing that property that was being sold to the location where I was working at the moment, the reason that person wanted to sell it, and this is a black swan that helped prevent a bad deal, was that they couldn't get permits for full use of that. So it was an awesome deal. But man, not until the 9th hour did we figure out that, okay, this is why this person wants to sell it. And we walked away from the deal, right? So always be ready to look and find those black swans. So let's talk about leverage here a little bit, though.
Yep.
So what were your thoughts on, there's different kinds of leverages, but I got a story where I lost because somebody gained the leverage. But the leverage you talked about before was the leverage hey, if there's only one buyer, right? Even if you think you are at a disadvantage, let's say at a garage sale or at a dealership or whatever it is, you are the only buyer at that moment, you instantly have leverage. And that's something I didn't think about, right? When somebody says, I want or I need to sell, that automatically gives you leverage. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. And the 3 types of leverage he talks here are positive leverage, negative leverage, and normative leverage. So just to quickly explain what each one is. Positive leverage is the thing where you've got what the person wants, right? That idea of hey, I've got, I can offer you this thing, I can make you happy, and you use that positive leverage. The negative leverage is the I'm going to make you suffer if you don't give me what you want, right? Like if you don't, like, I'm going to cut this. I'm not going to, my landlord is going to do this, or my boss is going to take this away. They've got this negative leverage over you rather than a positive leverage. Like, hey, if we give you this, will you do this? It's more of like, we're going to take this away. And so there's the negative leverage, which he kind of, explains you got to be very careful with using negative leverage. And then there's normative leverage, which is basically there's norms that people follow. So if you can recognize the way people normally behave and you see an inconsistency, you can point that out in a negotiation to kind of make them either look like a hypocrite if they don't follow the norm. So for example, I used to, when I was quite a bit younger, I was interested in like, producing like music and stuff like that, like making rap beats and things like that. And so one of the things I realized,
our music video.
One of the things I realized is it's a very difficult industry to get into. And I was never very good at it, but it was like, okay, I can make some like basic beats. Like how much can I sell a beat for? Right. And so I'm doing all this research, and a lot of the research, it's like, okay, like I could sell these beats for like $5 a piece, and make, like some decent money coming in here and there. And like for like a total license, maybe sell it for like $50. And, there's a little bit of money coming in here, but it's not like great. But the whole idea, I saw somebody made an argument that stuck with me, which was, now what are you going to do if you made a beat you sell for $5 for limited access and $50 for unlimited access? And then Dr. Dre comes and says, I'd like to buy a beat from you. I know you have this beat. And then it's like, $100,000, right? And it's like, he's going to pull the normative card of like, no, you charge everybody $50. Like you're not going to charge me more. If your stuff's worth that much, you ask for that much. And so it's the same thing of like in a deal. Like if you recognize they're normally like, I was paying attention today, I was at a swap meet and I'm listening to the prices a guy was giving to different people for different things. And so when I came and asked for a price, I'm expecting similar price, right? And I heard how he was negotiating, how far down he was going. And so I did the like, okay, how about this price? And he kind of came up a little higher. And I did the, hey, you just sold that guy that for $5. Like, come on now, right? And it's like, all right, fine. And so I pulled the normative card. Like, I know that you behave this way, you got to behave that way. So those are the three types: positive leverage, negative leverage, and normative leverage.
And the thing with leverage is you may gain it by just paying attention. He had talked about on here, there was this property that they were trying to sell, and then that took a lot of intel because they figured out that person needed to sell this property because they needed to pay bills on another property or something to that effect. So there's that. But some of it, he talks about here, going back to black swans, he says, most people expect that black swans are highly proprietary or closely guarded information. So in that situation, it was. But then he says, when in fact, the information may seem completely innocuous. Your counterpart always has pieces of information whose value they do not understand. And I think it's very important. So I'll give you an example where I did this poorly. So I'm just, I'm super young. I was in my early 20s. Some of you might be like, oh, that's not super. Yeah, to me, it's super young now. I'm 40. But I remember I got financed at a dealership for a certain amount of money. And man, had I replayed this, I would have played this totally different. I go and the car seller goes, hey, so how much you get financed for? I told him the amount. To me, I'm like, whatever. I'm just telling him my limits, and I think I'm doing a good thing and sharing with him, hey, this is what I can work with. I'll never forget, years later, my boss goes, we were just talking. He was a really good negotiator. He goes, did you really do that, Orlando? Do you understand that guy? I go, how? He asked me, how much did you pay for that car? And I said, like about $200 over what I was financed for. He's like, exactly. He took every single penny from you because you gave him information that you didn't have highly closely guarded. I mean, not using the same words, but you gave information and you didn't even think about what you were giving him. It just came up in a random conversation. Now, you're older and you understand things better. That piece of information that you thought wasn't a big deal. Now, again, a lot of you are listening. You're like, Orlando, you're an idiot. Like, that was a big deal. Okay, listen, I get it. All right, I get it. But at that time, I didn't think it was a big deal. So you never know what random information may be given over the side conversation. He had talked about how reporters record before and after always with their hot mics. And it's true. I can tell you how many times I've gone into a conference room and something that is being said just in jest, joking around the table before the meeting starts. I'm like, wait, now I know what angle to come at this meeting.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what he kind of talks about later is like this idea of listening. He explains that in a hostage negotiation situation, there's literally somebody who's listening, and then somebody who's listening and replaying what they've heard. Like there's like 8 people who just listen and are like going over the stuff over and over, because you're going to miss stuff. You miss stuff the first time around. And so that's one benefit of taking time, pausing, reflecting, going back over things is people divulge more information than they tend to. And every bit that they divulge could be a black swan that you can use. If what he says is true and everybody brings 3 to the table, right? What their actual number is that they're looking for, maybe outside influences, like, is it bills? Like when I see on a Craigslist ad, and again, this isn't like to manipulate people, but when you see on a Craigslist ad where someone's like, hey, like just bought a new car, need to get rid of this one, no room in the garage, or whatever it is, it's like, I got to get rid of this stuff. Wife wants it out of the house. It's like, okay, now I know that there's a time limit, right? They've given something up. And so even in negotiations, if they don't do that, even asking them like, oh, why are you getting rid of this? Or like can potentially give you information you need. And then just think about going into that idea of the 3 different types of leverage. Go into negotiations, like thinking of salary increase, aim for positive leverage. Negative leverage can be utilized. Just be careful with it. And then normative leverage also is useful. But I just think of those 3 in a salary negotiation. Positive leverage. Here are the things I offer to the company. Here are things extra that I can do. If you give me these responsibilities, here's how I can benefit the company, right? You're showing, here's the positive things I could do for you if we can come to what I want in the agreement. Negative leverage. All right, well, if you don't do this for me, then I can go and leave, right? Like you will lose me as an employee, or I will stop. Why don't you take that off my plate then if it's not gonna, right? You've got some negative leverage. You got to be careful with that, but it could be useful. And then the normatives of like, no, I know that like after 3 years, you offer X amount of vacation time. So why don't we at least offer me that? Why don't you give me what you do for 5 years? Because and then so you can start pulling the normative card in those situations.
And again, it's uncomfortable if you're not used to that, right? But again, like Mike said, you apply the template and you stay rigid to it, and in time things become more comfortable, right? You set that framework. Now, what about the section about knowing the religion?
Yeah, I thought that was good. And specifically when he mentions religion, he actually does use examples that involve like actual religion. But I think the idea, and he even kind of explains, is the idea of worldview. People have a worldview. They have a lens in which they see and interpret things. And if you can recognize that in a person, you can utilize that to your favor. And he gives examples of Christianity where he was able to use somebody seemed to be like, I don't know if I can make this deal. I got to talk to my advisors. And he kind of goes getting the hint that this guy was Christian. And so he used a Christian buzzword of like, man, I can tell for you, this is an issue of stewardship, right? And so he recognized that like this was an important concept for Christians, the idea of like stewarding their money or their responsibilities well. And so by doing that, he seemed to connect to the person. The person's like, yes, you get it. You understand, right? And so understanding that, whether it's like actual religion, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever it is, that knowing about somebody, that obviously is going to impact their worldview, or just understanding somebody's worldview. What are the things? How do they see justice and fairness? How do they interpret things? Like, what is their outlook on stuff? And when you can recognize those things, you can use the right buzzwords, because there's buzzwords for everything, right? You can use the right, hey, I'm one of you, because he makes a comment that if you can seem to be like similar, that people automatically are going to interact more and better with people who are similar to them. So if you're using the right words, you seem to understand their worldview. He gives like the funny analogy of like 2 dogs sniffing each other's butts, right? Like, are you like me? Do you wear the same kind of clothes as me? Do you talk like me? Do you have the same lifestyle as me? Is your worldview like mine? Right? And if you can recognize their worldview, can you use it to your advantage, either by being like them or recognizing what are the things that make them tick and what motivates them to make the decisions they make.
Now, when I was reading this, it's always, I know these guys are fundraisers, and I remember this guy's goal was to raise about 1,000 businesses in different locations throughout the country. And I remember in talking to him, I said, how do you get people to give you that initial amount? Because it seems like you're getting a big amount, you're getting, a nice pledge like right away. I said, do you talk exactly about what your business is, or how do you angle it? And I remember he told me that he would approach people, and he knew that if certain people are of a certain political range, right, he would say, do you really like the direction that this country is going? Right. And he would say that, and he knew he hooked them. because he knew that that's what they were about. So his business wasn't necessarily about that issue, but his business could help with that issue. And he knew that was that individual's religion. So it could be a political, it could be, something that deals like with a religious issue. It could be something that deals with the social movement, whatever it is. Finding that worldview is key. And this guy was super successful. I mean, this guy worked magic. So obviously, I've been around people that know how to do this well, but it just validated for me because, it's kind of, I throw this out here. So in Godfather 2, there's the scene where, I forget, I don't correlate. I think his son, Al Pacino's character, he's in Cuba. And this is going to be a crazy example. He's in Cuba and there's a guy, this is right before the Cuban Revolution with Fidel Castro. And the guy goes, "Viva la revolucion," and like blows himself up. And he goes, and he said, and we know this to be true. He goes, so that he basically points out like people, when it comes to something that becomes a religious cause or something that's very dear to them, they are willing to move on things, right? And it's the same scenario here. This is what he's saying. So not strictly religion, but if it's something that people really care about, man, if you're able to make it happen, it'll definitely help you out. Right. So anyways,
that's good.
That's good. All right. Some more we got from here. There's a lot of interesting scenario he throws about the mistakes. Right? Did you pick up any ideas from the mistakes in here?
Mistakes. Let's see. What are you talking about specifically?
Well,
mistakes that you make that you think that they're making.
Well, he talks about like, hey, there are times that maybe there are mistakes that if you can clarify them, you can make good on, right? So sometimes like a negotiation is going bad. It's going bad, not because of anything you've done, but maybe there's been the mistake of misinformation, right? So he points out on page 234, he says, the clear point here is that people operating with incomplete information appear crazy to those that have different information, right? So sometimes you might be in a negotiation and somebody gives you a certain price or a certain number, and you're like, that is crazy, right? And you're not willing to move on with that negotiation, but maybe they don't have all the facts. So I'll break it down to really basic information. So
yeah, and specifically this section starts, and I like now I get like where this came in because I had to remember like how this idea of mistakes came up in the book. Okay. So oftentimes people will say like, I can't work with this person, they're crazy, right? And the truth is, most people aren't crazy, right? Like one aspect was going back to the religion, what somebody's worldview, but oftentimes people are just, they have mistakes when it comes to negotiations, or there's something that's causing them to act in a certain way. So you have to recognize maybe it's not that they're crazy, but there's something else going on here, right? Like one of them, they're ill-informed. They don't actually have the information they need. So they make this unreasonable request. And then after you provide the information they need, you could just walk away, right? Like you could say like the whole thing, like we talked about at a garage sale, how much you want for this? $40. And you're like, oh gosh, there's no way that's only worth like, I'd only pay $5 for it. You just walk away, but maybe they're ill-informed. So they're operating under the mistake. You could just say that person's crazy, I'm not dealing with them. Or you could say, hey, they're just mistaken, right?
Well, and that's the example I was going to give. Yeah. The really easy example is you're at a garage sale, somebody says, I want $100 for this. And you're like, that's crazy. The easiest way to do it is you pull up comps. You've sold on eBay and you go, I see why, this looks valuable to you, but realistically, this is what they're selling for on eBay if you want to take a look real quick. Mm-hmm. And I've used that multiple times and I get the price down and I walk away, with the price that I want. Yep. But it's not that they were crazy, is that they were just ill-informed and hence appeared to be crazy.
Yeah. I had the same thing happen at a estate sale the other day. A person had like one of those, were they OBD readers? Like you could tell what's wrong with the car. I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyways, mm-hmm. So they wanted, it was new in package and they wanted $150 for it. And so I'm looking up and comps are going for like $80, $70 on these. And I'm like, $150. Like, where'd they even get this number? So I asked how much for it. And they were like, oh, we can maybe go down to like 120. And so I had to tell them like, it's not worth that. I'll give you 10 for it. Right. And they're like, no, like these sell new on Amazon for X amount. And I'm like, okay, like maybe somebody has it listed. And I did. I showed comps. I said, they actually sell for on eBay, this exact one for about $60, right? Like if it's in really good condition and it's new and the package is good. And then they saw that and they're like, okay. And I was able to get them down to like 35, which for me, I did the no deal, right? Like it just wasn't worth it. Like if I could have got it for 10, it would have been worth it. At 35, by the time I would have not had much profit in it, right? So it wasn't worth it for me to actually make that deal, but I got them down from 150 to 35 when they were like maybe 120. They were just ill-informed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once you inform them, now things start to change.
And then the next one he talked about, which I think is another important one, is they're constrained. And basically talks about an individual that's trying to make a deal with Coca-Cola, but in the long run, they found out that they were talking to the wrong guy.
Yeah.
That he was the key point, and then he lost influence. And I think sometimes when people aren't willing to make a deal with you, you got to see if they are the deal maker, right? And if they're not, it takes some work. But, you know, if you still want that deal to happen, you got to find out who the deal maker is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all the time. I can tell you, there were instances when I was trying to get positioned at certain places where I just was talking to the wrong person. So I exhausted all this energy when I should have just been talking to somebody else, right? But that's hard to know, right? That takes some research and that takes some work. And then I like this point about FaceTime.
Yes, that's so good.
Because I really, really feel that in our current society, and again, I'm all, you know me, I'm all about social media. I'm all about, well, I'm not a fan of texting. Mike knows that. But, you know, we were so bound by it. But man, being face-to-face, negotiations are so much better.
Yeah, better, and I'm sure just different. I've done quite a few deals, like I mentioned. I'm probably going to say 100 times. People are going to get tired of this, but the Craigslist ad thing is really it's changing me in a lot of ways because it's forcing me to negotiate more. Because I'm like negotiations are just coming to me at the most random times, right? Like the other day, I was at the mall with my wife and I get a message of this like crazy possible good deal. And so me and my wife are looking up comps. Like we had no intention of like doing research right then.
Like this is, you turn the corner.
Yeah.
Here.
So we had no, like, that wasn't our desire at that time, was like to be figuring out negotiating with somebody, but it just fell in our lap. So we had to do some negotiation. But FaceTime is big because a lot of times when it's happening over text message, one good thing about it is it gives me time. It gives me time to do research to find out what something's really worth. But I'm not able to pick up the cues and the black swans from them that might be useful. So one thing that I just don't like, and I think it's my generation, I don't like calling. I don't like talking on the phone. I'd rather text every single time, right? I'd rather talk on the phone or, you know, something in person every time than have to do phone call. Phone call is just, I don't like it. I'd rather text. So to me, it's tough because I'm trying to make all these deals when it would be beneficial when we get close on a deal. Hey, can I give you a call? Right. And actually get that call, because a lot of it is coming through tone of voice. Right. And we can maybe make some things happen. It's going to be harder for someone to say no to you, in the same way that it's really easy for somebody to like say something really mean on the internet or even flip somebody off while driving by. It's very different when you're face to face. And a phone call isn't face to face, but it's a lot closer than text messages. And so, you know, I need to get better at being willing to say like, hey, can I give you a call? We can maybe work out the rest of this deal. And go from there, because you're going to be able to hear, are they like, oh, I really can't. Are they like, you know, you could tell they're kind of eager, or like what's motivating them, and they can hear your voice and you're like, man, I really want to do that. I can't, like, I can do 30. Like, can you help me get to that price? Like, what can you do? And they could tell, as instead of just, they read into your text of like, I can only do 30, right? And you kind of seem harsh. And so, phone calls is going to be better than text, and face-to-face is going to be better than phone calls.
Yeah, and the other part I wanted to talk about was, if you don't do face-to-face, it's easier for a person to walk away from a deal.
Yep.
Right? When my experience has been, the best deals I've ever made is face-to-face, because you, over text, you don't come to an agreement and person puts their phone down and it could be done and they could ghost you and that's it. But when you're face-to-face and you really want something, you can apply all these items that are discussed in this book and eventually, hopefully, walk out with that deal, right? And, you know, I give you experience as an administrator. I can't tell you how many times in my early days of administration, I would just email some parent and man, all craziness would break loose, because, you know, the better situation would have been to get on the phone or meet with that person, because number one, it cut out a bunch of time, because, you know, when you're emailing and doing all this, you may be losing time because you're not getting to the crux of the matter right away. Right. Where when I'm meeting with somebody, I always said this, whenever somebody walked into my office, we were going to walk away and that person was going to be satisfied with the outcome. right? I would hash it out. But in the end, there wasn't an opportunity for that person to walk away, where an email is like, man, who knows what that person can interpret out of that, right? So face to face, just old school.
Yep. It's good.
All right. So we're coming to the end here. And I really like the way he closes things off. He makes a statement towards the end on page 242. He says, if this book accomplishes one thing, I hope it gets you over that fear of conflict and encourages you to navigate with empathy. If you're going to be great at anything, a great negotiator, a great manager, a great husband, a great wife, you're going to have to do that. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways out of all this, because I look at this negotiation, there's conflict in this negotiation, right? Because you're looking at never splitting the difference. And if you're never going to split the difference, it's going to create conflict, right? Because if you have a compromise, well, you know, you kind of walk away and you feel uneasy, but there really wasn't a lot of conflict. But to get to a place, it's going to take some work.
Yep. And going back to that idea of conflict, and I see you have it highlighted in your book too. He says here, whether it's in the office or around family dinner, don't avoid honest, clear conflict. It will get you the best car price, the higher salary, and the largest donation. It will also save your marriage, your friendship, and your family. And that's so crucial. We talked multiple times, like negotiation, it's a business thing, but this book in so many ways is also a marriage book and a friend communication book and all of those things, because there's going to be conflict, and we often have a tendency to avoid conflict. And if you're not the kind of person that has the natural tendency to avoid conflict, your tendency is to like aggressively go into conflict. And both of those things are going to be reasons you're going to fail and things are going to fall apart. So when you can learn to navigate conflict well, negotiate well, you're going to make more money. You're going to negotiate better salaries. You're going to have better relationships with people. And so this really is a communication book. And I would say, you know, if you haven't read it, read it, because we only scratched the surface, probably didn't do it justice. And so check it out. I've already applied a bunch of it. I'd probably say the amount of money I've made, the cost of this book versus the amount of money I've made in negotiation changes. I can't even imagine already. And this is just after just now reading it. So over the course of my life, how much extra money am I going to make because of what I've learned from this book? It's an insane investment.
Yeah. So super grateful for this book. Definitely a game changer in my life, personal and in business. So Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Appreciate that book. With that being said, make sure to be real,
be relevant,
and be reselling. Please.